So good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for inviting me for tonight's occasion and giving me the opportunity to talk about public space, the exhibition Skulptur Projekte in Münster, and how sculptures can be embodied by people. It's a pleasure for me to be in Málaga, especially here at the Museo Picasso, and to get to know your wonderful museum here and maybe exchange ideas with you later. Regarding my lecture, I will start with pointing to a discussion about a work of art by Pablo Picasso in public space in Chicago, and then jump to a similar but much less known process in Münster, which was the starting point for a unique exhibition format involving sculpture. As the recently opened exhibition, Picasso Sculptor, Matter and Body is focusing on body and matter, I will pick up these two characteristic aspects and concentrate on the question of what role the body plays regarding sculpture today. So there are some parallels maybe to Jonathan's lecture, and I can profit from pictures he showed because one is missing in my lecture. So this is maybe one way where it goes together already. Looking briefly at the historical development of the exhibition Skulptur Projekte in Münster, I will give an insight into some selected projects, especially from the exhibition in 2017, where I was part as the curator. I will allow us to take a look at the way artists use the body to extend their ideas about sculpture. So I need this for going on. Yeah. So you've seen my title in the program, and I added above a quote, which is part of my lecture. And this is maybe also giving us a bit of guideline of what I'm talking about. A clash in time, a cut, a vision, an experiment, a sculpture project. If you go to the exhibition rooms here in the Museo Picasso in Málaga, you find a very nice sculpture by Pablo Picasso, which comes from the collection of the Art Institute in Chicago. It's the maquette for Richard J. Delay Center sculpture, made of simulated and oxidized welded steel. It's about 70 to 50 centimeter and made in 1964. Only 3 years later, in the summer of 1967, on August 15, a 20-meter tall steel untitled sculpture, which the maquette was made for, was unveiled as the Chicago Picasso. And that was in the center on the Delay Plaza and dedicated to the city of Chicago. The 162-ton work, which has turned from bright orange to dark gray, thanks to years of weathering, so you see it's a different color than the maquette in the exhibition, exists because of Chicago architect William E. Hartman. He wanted to commission an artist to create a monumental work to serve as the focus point on the plaza. Picasso agreed to the task, but also refused payment for it. He wanted his work to be a gift to the people of Chicago. The building behind the sculpture is about as huge as the plaza is, and so the scale of the sculpture is enormous in comparison to the viewer. I think you can see that quite nice on the image, how small people are in regarding to the sculpture. Regarding scale, the sculpture obviously asked the big question, also Jonathan presented tonight. What is modern sculpture? This was also a title of a landmark and controversial exhibition about sculptures in the Centre Pompidou in Paris in 1987, 20 years after the unveiling of the Chicago Picasso. This show, spanning the first 70 years of the century, discussed Picasso's work among other groundbreaking positions like Brancusi, Giacometti, Gonzalez, and David Smith, as already Jonathan pointed out, and tried to categorize his work as an homage to an aesthetics of nature or an aesthetics of culture. And as it turned out, a categorization wasn't possible because Picasso belonged to both you can call them schools, respectively, worked in both and I think additionally in many more directions. Picasso never stopped finding new definitions and confusing critiques throughout his life. His work, which for lack of a better term are called sculptures, could not be more different. They are made of different materials like bronze, iron, wood, stone, fabric, paper, and even more. And even if these materials normally could be not combined, he glued plants and sand to cardboard without a second thought. He was not even afraid to paint sculptures, which really broke all the rules at that time. Assemblages were the quickest for him. Like you can see here, you see in the exhibition many more examples. But for the Chicago Picasso, he stylized a portrait of his second wife, Jacqueline Roch, but the elongated nose is based on that of an Afghan hound Picasso owned. Actually, there is quite a lot of research about Picasso's dog, which I won't address, even if it's very tempting to go into that topic with a dog, but I will go on and get back. So let's go to the Chicago Picasso. With his works, Picasso significantly violated the contemporary conventions of sculpture. By combining a variety of techniques and materials, he contributed to a broader definition of sculpture. Picasso's sculptures also laid the foundation for the most radical forms of modern sculpture, which continue to inspire generations of artists to till today. Almost everything that has been created in our century in terms of sculpture could refer to Picasso. And I will later come back to that point when I talk about Skulptur Projekte in Münster in Germany. There was a huge celebration for its unveiling, and you can see there is an orchestra, there had been speeches, and especially there had been thousands of people during the unveiling. In a conversation with the artist and in preparation for this book about sculptures, Werner Spies, one of the most famous writers about Picasso, said this sentence, which is also, I think, mentioned in the realm of the exhibition: "It feels like discovering an unknown civilization." But certainly, it caused a ruckus when it was first unveiled in 1967. Many people were simply baffled by the abstract sculpture. Others showed up with signs that deemed it a colossal boo-boo and an insult to Chicago's greatness. Slogans like "Let's give it back now" appeared on protest signs. That was not exactly an ideal welcome for what Picasso intended as a gift to the people of Chicago. Over 50 years later, after its public unveiling, the sculpture continues to elicit a wide range of interpretations from passers-by. For sure, when its 50th anniversary was celebrated in 2017, there were no protests. The sculpture, from the perspective of today, and not to be expected otherwise, has become a beloved icon of Chicago. So this situation is maybe value for another, I don't know how many works of art in public space. And I will come to a similar example quite soon. Art in public space in general was not something new. There were statues, fountains, monuments already, but modern and postmodern art in public space was a novelty back in 1967. An increased awareness of art in public spaces from the Renaissance to contemporary art occurred with the necessary creation of new communicative open spaces during urban expansions back in the 1960s and 70s. So I jump to Münster and have a look to what happens in Europe, in Westphalia, in Germany. Less famous, but marking the beginning of a long-term study in the form of an exhibition format in a small university town in the north of Germany called Münster, there was a similar development going on concerning sculpture in public space. When George Rickey placed his kinetic sculpture 3 rotary squares, you have seen it just now, there was a significant public outcry against the placement of the work of art. The citizens of Münster hated this modern sculpture, which seems completely harmless today. To address this dissatisfaction and to attempt to bridge understanding about art in public space, Klaus Bussmann, the former director of the museum, undertook a series of lectures and presentations about modern sculpture at the museum in 1974. During this time, the idea for Skulptur Projekte Münster was born with Klaus Bussmann on the right side, and he appointed Caspar Koenig on the left side as curator. Together with Caspar Koenig, Klaus Bussmann repeated the exhibition in 1987 and in 1997. In 2007 and in 2017, Caspar Koenig was the artistic director for Skulptur Projekte and worked together with different curatorial teams. So already after the third edition, the format started to become a tradition, but that was not planned in the beginning. The controversy about art in public space, which was initiated by George Rickey's 3 rotary squares, was the starting point for Skulptur Projekte in Münster in 1977. So that was 10 years after the unveiling of the Chicago Picasso. Both examples which I have mentioned now show the beginning of what I have described as performing sculpture embodiment in public space in my title for today's lecture. This title certainly implies a broad and extended understanding of sculpture and points to the involvement of the body. To get a better insight how the term and the idea of sculpture develop, I will give you an insight in the ideas and also in the format of Skulptur Projekte in Münster. Skulptur Projekte Münster is one of the oldest and maybe most famous formats for public art worldwide. But any talk about Skulptur Projekte should be prefaced by a brief look at the city. Münster is a fairly wealthy, growing city with a population of about 330,000 inhabitants. Like many cities, Münster was completely destroyed after World War II, but then reconstructed. It's today a destination for tourists and a huge outdoor shopping mall, so you can compare it a bit maybe to Málaga. When I walked through the streets today, I thought, yes, the outdoor shopping mall is also the same here. On the basis of this city, issues of site specificity, publicness, and perception can therefore be considered prototypically. So Münster can serve as a model. And you can see that on that aerial view, you have the university, so that, I have a laser? No. So that star there is the botanical garden, and all you see inside that circle is the inner city of Münster. In 1977, part of the exhibition took place in the museum. Another part, which Caspar Koenig was responsible for, was the open air project. He brought a lot of American artists, and today they are all well known. Karl André, Claes Oldenburg, Donald Judd, and Bruce Nauman, just to mention some of them. All the artists came to Münster and made a site-specific suggestion for a work of art. Contemporary art in public space was also there, still a novelty then. When Claes Oldenburg was invited to participate in the first Skulptur Projekte, he used pool balls to imagine Münster as a huge playing field and spread huge pool balls in the proposals all over the city. So what is used in Münster is that artists come to the city, then make a proposal, a suggestion, and then it's discussed. And this is until today still the same procedure. So Claes Oldenburg first made a lot of drawings and collages where he showed how it could look like. And on the right side, you see one of these balls. So there had been 18 imagined balls in the city. And on the other side, you see the model for the whole picture he intended to do. As with the Chicago Picasso, there are a lot of anecdotes about Münster inhabitants trying to get rid of that balls. Beyond numerous complaints and comments in protest, there had also been unsuccessful attempts to level the concrete spheres, weighing 11 tons of their foundations and roll them into the lake which was nearby. So you can see that on the image below. This example serves well to illustrate the broad rejection of the exhibition among the population, cutting across political camps. After lots of protests against the exhibition in the first years, the citizens of Münster came to embrace the exhibition, also a parallelity to other cities. And I love these two images. It's a chocolate tart you can buy in the shops in Münster. The relationship between citizens and art changed completely from then to now, from hate to love. Today, people are quite proud of Skulptur Projekte. But for many people, the advertising effect is more in the foreground than the art. They are celebrating its presence in the city, and business owners understand quite well the economic benefits it brings to the rather small university town. And it's the same when you leave the museum. You stand in front of the shops here selling Picasso t-shirts, for sure. That's part of the game. The founder of the Skulptur Projekte, Klaus Bussmann, always pointed to the pedagogical aspect of art and emphasizes that in the beginning it had been a wish to make the current examination of the problem of sculpture more lucid through historical examples from the development of abstract sculpture in the 20th century. Therefore, he wrote in the preface of the first catalogue in 1977, I quote, "It was clear that not all of the key works that could stand for this development could be brought to the exhibition in 1977. But the presentation in the Westfaelisches Landesmuseum remains surprisingly rich in works whose innovative character is undeniable." And he went on, "It's regrettable that none of the copies of Picasso's absinthe glass, and we have seen one already today, could be secured for the exhibition, nor any of the important works by Picasso from the early 1930s, all of which are locked away in Picasso's estate in Paris." So you can see in that times, he just didn't get a loan of a Picasso work, so it could not be part, but he mentioned it in, I think, in the first lines of the catalogue. Bussmann mentioned on the first pages, especially one, which is now on display here. It's the absinthe glass, and my colleague has shown already, because this work, that one, is incredible for this time, and I would like to include it now in my lecture also. So Bussmann continued, quote, "Essential abstract sculptures of the 20th century, often largely unknown to the German public, showed the development of cause, not in the sense of causality and logical sequence, but in the demonstration of breaks with tradition, of innovations as the conquest of new eras of experience and dimension." Quote end. What Bussmann was interested in was not an allegorical figure or a portrait bust. He was interested in Picasso's life-size rendering of a glass of alcohol, which was shocking in its banality. I go one back because you can see here quite well. Cast in bronze and in edition of 6, and then hand-painted, none of the finished works is colored green, so it was clearly not absinthe, distinctive color that inspired Picasso. Instead, absinthe offered Picasso the opportunity to use a real piece of cutlery, a scope-shaped spoon designed to hold a sugar cube over the rim of a glass as a drink is prepared. You can see that quite good, the sugar on the spoon on the top. Also here, you can see that quite well. When asked about the sculpture years later, Picasso remembered that he had been particularly intrigued by, I quote, the relationship between the real spoon and the model glass in the way they clashed with each other. So that clash I mentioned is now important for, let's say, the experiment I would like to make with you and take you on a journey of thoughts about clash. Skulptur Projekte describes always a break, a clash in time, a cut, a vision, an experiment. So that's why it's called Skulptur Project. And I love this drawing. Actually, it changed my life. When I now have breakfast, I always think of this. You will see why. And I stay with Claes Oldenburg. Exactly this clash occurred in a witty drawing of Oldenburg from 1987, so 10 years after the first edition, when he was invited again for the second edition of Skulptur Projekte. His original plan for the second Skulptur Projekte had initially been to continue the giant pool balls from 1977. As I said, it was not completely realized. Only 3 balls had been placed then. So first he thought he could place the other ones, but then he changed and he made that drawing as a second suggestion. Concisely and without further explanation, the drawing, and I will quote the title, where the collision occurred between the slice of bread and the stick of butter on June 1st in 1987 at 8:15. This is listed in the 1987 Skulptur Projekte catalog as Oldenburg's second project. With his butter and bread sketch of 1987, the artist declared a single, precisely defined street corner of Münster to be the stage of a strange meeting. In Oldenburg's scenario, the 2 actors, the bread and the butter, come into contact with each other through a misshape or unclear circumstances and, after the shock of the impact, become entangled in each other. Or, as my colleague Julius Lehmann, who was working with me in the archive, asked, is it already the tentative hint of an embrace? In case this drawing describes the irritations that the Skulptur Projekte triggered in the Westphalian provincial capital, or, well, how I would put it, how art happens in everyday life. The drawing shows in a very playful but accurate way changes to the idea of what sculpture is. It no longer concerns only materials or materialization. It's about something which occurs and makes you think. And Jonathan also put it forward, it's about ideas and concepts. The body certainly remains a central point of reference, but not necessarily a subject matter which the artist works on like on a portrait. Instead, the focus shifts to the real human body as sculptural material, regardless of whether it is the performers or the viewers who become objects of contemplation. I will give a short and brief overview of the Skulptur Projekte with a wide range of examples and then come to some projects from the last exhibition that addressed the question of material and body in an expanded form of sculpture. In the same way Oldenburg made his drawing, Katharina Fritsch cast a life-size replica of Our Lady of Lourdes in duroplast. The artist coated the figure with luminous yellow and positioned it in a busy shopping street. Perceptions of the sculpture by people in Münster varied widely, as did their response. Some people saw the figure as a religious motive and laid flowers in its honor. In other people, the sculpture provoked reactions like vandalism and destructive anger. It was in a way also what Oldenburg showed by the collision between the slice of bread and the stick of butter. So once it was stolen and they had to get it back from the police and made it newly, I think 3 or 4 times. Oops. Sculpture projects was always a format which allowed all medias and genres to discuss questions of sculpture from different perspectives. In his action, Rainer Rutenbeck used the over 4-kilometer long ring of the promenade, which runs around the city center. You've seen that ring on the aerial view before. So that is the promenade, which is made by trees left and right side, what you can see here. It is used by the citizens of Münster as a foot and bicycle path. He sent one black and one white horse with riders on a circular trip around the promenade in opposite direction. At 2 points, an encounter black and white, that was the title, occurred, and this was a way of thinking. He continued in a series of works. So that was a performative work as part of sculpture projects in 1987. Another contribution I would like to mention is Bruce Naumann's Square Depression, a 25 to 25 meter square base. The sculpture had been planned in 1977, but never realized. After 30 years, the work was finally realized in 2007, according to the original design and location. It was part of the public collection, but it had been deinstalled in 2020, unfortunately. And it was and is one of the most fascinating works, and its history shows how important the idea of the long-term study is to the city. The museum, together with the University of Münster, who is building a new campus on that site, is working on reinstalling it with the next few years. So we're expecting it, hopefully before 2030. But that's not clear until now. In 2007, Dominique González-Förster addressed Skulptur Projekte by using its archive, a practice which was more and more part of some works. She considered the question of how the city of Münster has dealt with its own identity and the impact of art in urban space. With her installation, Roman de Münster, consisting of 33 miniature objects, the artist examined the series of exhibitions in its entire history, but without adding a single object of her own. González-Förster chose certain works by other artists who had contributed to sculpture projects from 1977 to 2007 and had them reproduced to a scale of 1:4. Oops. Looking to González-Förster, I would like to say something about the 10-yearism of the exhibition. The former curator, Brigitte Franzen, found the term long-term study to describe the Skulptur Projekte as a whole. She was referring not only to the dimensions of time and the still existing works, but also to the uniqueness of the format. This slowness of 10 years is one of the most important aspects. Working as a curator for Skulptur Projekte and looking at its history, I have to say that the rhythm and the slowness of the format allows a way of thinking which is unique. So that's what I meant by saying cut in time. Everything comes out of an extensive discussion between artists, people in the city, and curators, and derives from carefully prepared research about places and developments, or occurs as a clash between a bread and a slice of butter. This can still be seen in the exhibition title. Both the word sculpture and projects have thus retained their legitimation. Skulptur Projekte is a continuous debate, an ongoing discussion about site specificity, sculpture, time, place, body, and topics related to art in public space. Anyway, the curators are for sure concerned about special fields of interest in every edition and in their own contemporary situation. For the 2017 edition, our focus was the vanishing space and the vanishing body in the age of digitalization. This is also a reason why the human body, which has always been a topoi for artists working with sculpture, was also the focus for some performance works in that edition. In 2017, there were several works that dealt with performative moments on the level of production and perception. Sculpture in 2017 was something only produced visibly through actions and of performers or through the use of works by visitors. Alexandra Perici chose the Majors Hall for her work Leaking Territories to reflect on relations between cities, sculptures, and people. She confronted public memorials and places with a vivid, ephemeral gesture. Based on the history of the city of Münster, Perici addressed the peace of Westphalia, its importance, and above all, its political relevance. She addressed the concept of nations, their sovereignty and power structures. In that birthplace of diplomacy, in that Hall of Peace, Perici presented a performative work and that took place 4 hours a day during the 4 months of sculpture projects. Oops. Too far already to go back. So, in the case of Perici's performance, the visitors stayed in the space much longer than expected. Most watched the work for 40 minutes, which was unexpected for us as curators, until it repeated, or the performers needed a break. Regarding this, the visitors themselves actually determined how much they saw and how much others saw, or also not saw. The bodies of those present also decided, in each case, on the configuration of spectators and performers. This can be seen particularly well in the photographs of the performance. The bodies intermingle at times. I think that image is better for that. And the spectators thus inscribe themselves in the performance and the image of it. The spectators also intervened in Perici's otherwise very strict choreography in the moment when they could Google terms from the performers as if they were search engines. They could actively influence the course of a scene within the performance. The visitors are thus part of the performance and partly embody a sculpture in space. With an almost invisible, sunk in the water footbridge, some centimeters under the surface of the water, Aisha Erkman questioned functions and rules of the 2 banks of the Canal in Münster, the so-called creative bank and the so-called industrial bank. The project evolved a very iconic image of people walking on the water. This was, of course, quoting a religious image and reminded us of the variety of religious faith through the world and the importance of having images of them. Actually, it goes automatically, even if I don't turn. I don't know why, so I'm not doing nothing, but it goes on. So I always have to go back manually. So, regarding body and material, it is interesting that the work made us look at the others. When you stepped onto the hidden bridge, you immediately started to watch each other and to observe what others were doing and how they were behaving. So the work is the public and the people. You could even not see that footbridge. Aisha Erkman's footbridge was extremely popular. Celebrated weddings, people celebrated weddings on it, took group photos. It's going by them by itself, but I don't know how to do it. And it was the darling of the masses, to quote a local newspaper headline. The work demonstrated like no other work that the Skulptur Projekte have arrived in the middle of the society. The rejection and aggression of 1977 has today polemically formulated turned into integration and sometimes even an embrace. So I go to the next work and hope that it stops only when I go on, continues to go on. Contrary to a clear localization, the work still untitled by Xavier Leroy and Scarlett Yu showed itself as a placeless work that can be distributed across the entire urban space. The two artists conceived sculpture, or rather the elaboration of their performative practice, as an ongoing process during the duration of the exhibition. The work consists of performatively produced situations in the urban space, which were learned before in workshops, like you could see here, entitled Embody Your Sculpture, Try It Out Public. The work consists of a short conversation piece in which the body functions as subject and object at the same time. So in relation to its surroundings, the body is placed as material and questions what sculpture can actually be for each individual. Still untitled, so was the title of that work, does not have the usual object character, no specific place, and also no clear time, but negotiated the theme of sculpture very comprehensively. Beyond the space in which we find ourselves, this work considers the body, the perception of ourselves and of the other as object and subject. So I show you some examples. There were hundreds of people making the workshops and learned how to do these sculptures and how to do the conversation pieces, and therefore it was spread through the city. So it could happen that you meet that work several times or never when you have been to Münster. That was in the museum, and you always have to look a bit where the sculpture is. So it's there, it's Xavier Leroy himself who is doing it. Central to the work in the conversation is the conversation about sculpture. It always started with the question, have you heard about Skulptur Projekte? Actually, in the beginning, we were starting with another sentence and we said, would you like to see my sculpture? But this was a bit like Tinder-like, so we stopped that and went for, have you heard of Skulptur Projekte? The act of speaking, which could be trained during workshops on site in Münster, became the basis for developing one's own sculpture. It is the definite act that makes the work individual to each visitor. Returning to the beginning of the lecture, there is something which the work has in common with the Chicago Picasso, even if 60 years later it seems very far away from it. Still untitled, that work of Xavier Leroy made a particular historical moment in which we find ourselves very clear, like a clash in time, like a cut, like a vision, and like an experiment. Thank you for your attention.